Hello and welcome to Investing in Hope, a continuing series of video conversations that the Live Love Laugh Foundation is hosting throughout the month of October that draws on the global theme for the 2020 World Mental Health Day, greater investment, greater access, time to invest. Today we have an excellent and diverse panel of speakers who I will get to introducing in a moment. But I want to say that all of them are bound by their common passion for mental health, and their individual and collective journeys in mental health have been characterized by putting in, the hard miles for years in this challenging field. They have a lot of learning which they have agreed to share, so thank you all. I'm so pleased to welcome Manoj Chandran, CEO, White Swan Foundation in Bangalore, Dr. Raghu Kiran Appasani, MD, founder and CEO, Minds Foundation, who joins us all the way from the US. Ratna Boli Ray, founder and managing trustee, Anjali, who's based in Kolkata. And Dr. Abhijit Nadkarni, co-director, Addictions Research Group, Sangat, who joins us from Goa. A warm welcome to all of you on behalf of everyone at the Live Love Laugh Foundation, and thank you for making the time to join us today. It is a truism to say that there is no health without mental health. I want to start with you, Manoj. While awareness of mental health seems to be at an all-time high, it seems to be most often in the form of statements such as, you are enough and you can achieve anything if you try and be positive, or misguided statements in the mental health context such as, stress is not an event, but your response to an event. How do you think responsible content creators should strike a balance between engagement and scientific rigor? Manoj?
Sure, Brian, and thank you for having me here at this discussion. And it's a great question to start with. So, Brian, I would want to start by saying that I'm a student of communication. I have always been in my career. And one of the first things that we're taught in communication is that our audiences and not the content or its creator is at the center of our communication. And we must deeply empathize with them. We must understand them beyond what they are able to articulate of their needs. Many a time, even they won't be able to articulate what they need. And that's the power of communication, to be able to really connect with them, engage in a conversation with them, understand their need, understand how are they disempowered and how do you empower them to be able to make the right choices. And once you build that empathy, you would begin to say that you will begin to filter out various parts of the communication thing. You'll say that, okay, I don't think scientific aspect or direction will help me serve that communication better. I don't think by using clinical language, it will be right way to communicate with them. So constantly weeding out those technical terms and then making sure that my language is simple, my language gets them to relate to the message that we have.
I want to bring Dr. Raghu into the conversation. Raghu, any mention of mental health evokes connotations of anxiety, depression, or stress-related disorders. Do we need to, as Manoj was pointing out, broaden our understanding? And how are disorders across the spectrum different? And how does, more importantly, the resourcing to handle these need to differ?
Sure. Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the Live Love Laugh Foundation for including Minds and myself in this conversation. I think, first off, I have to say it is truly an honor to be on the same platform here as Ratna ji and some of the other players who have been in the space for quite some time. So I'm still in my infancy in the space. So, but to address your question, and I second what Manoj is saying, and it actually goes to answer this question, is that, through education and focusing on mental health literacy, you lead to empowerment. And that's really where the change happens, when someone feels empowered to make a change. And so when we think about mental health literacy, though, what we really need to stress is that mental health is a spectrum, because the problem that I'm seeing now is that it's really wonderful to see so many people joining in to make a change in the mental health space. But if we focus just on depression or stress or anxiety, and we don't highlight the spectrum of mental health, which includes addiction and schizophrenia and bipolar and trauma, then we're actually widening the gap. And that's actually something that I am a little bit fearful about as advocacy rises and focusing on depression. So when we think about education, I want to ensure and make sure that everyone who's entering the space and is in the space understands that we do need to deliver knowledge about the spectrum of all of these illnesses, right? Because not only can mental health be an illness, you know, we all have mental health. We're all on some point at that spectrum and some point in our life. And if the pandemic has demonstrated anything, it's that at least we face mental distress, maybe not mental illness. And so people are wanting resources, they need it, they need understanding. So the time is really prime right now for us to ensure that we use this opportunity to educate the general public about things like depression, anxiety, but also about the whole spectrum of mental health conditions.
Couldn't help but be struck by this quote from Toni Morrison that features as part of your email signature, Ratna. And I think the quote says, all paradises, all utopias are designed by those who are not there, by the people who are not allowed in. So I think marginalization in society operates in several forms. There's gender, income, community, and even age. Which groups or individuals have the most difficulty in accessing the mental health care system in India? And can you talk a little bit about why a rights-based approach is so important in mental health care?
Thanks, Brian, and hi everyone on the panel. I don't want to, Brian, this is an important question, but I don't want to hierarchize marginalization, because there are many marginalized groups out there, and there are many forms of marginalization, and
right.
Each comes with its own set of challenges. Therefore, to point out one group to say that this group cannot access will not perhaps be fair.
Sure.
I think we should look at marginalization as a political process, as a political tool. And when we talk about access of mental health care, I think we have to focus on how currently the mental health services are organized in our country.
Right.
Either it is tertiary at the hospital level, or it is at the community level, government run, which is the district mental health program. And then there are civil society organizations, initiative like Sangat, like Center for Mental Health Policy and Law, Atmiyata, or Anjali, or Banyan, or Isha Shankar. There are many organizations. And we have to examine those mental health services. Coming back to why we need to employ a mental health, a rights language in mental health, the discourse has to move, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Because the discourse has been predominantly on the biomedical paradigm.
Right.
It's the brain, it's the symptom, we need the cure. And therefore the whole onus is on the individual, on people like us. So we have to take responsibility for the cure, completely obliterating the social context, the political context, the economic contexts we live in. We do not, unfortunately, Brian, we do not live anymore one story. Mm-hmm. We live several stories now. I have a caste story to say, I have a class story to say. So therefore we have to look at all those connections. And in mental health, human rights gives you a fabulous playground to play with equality, to play with fairness, to play with participation, to talk about inclusion on one hand, and then bring in the important layers of how poverty then plays with, say, participation. and then how it impacts mental health or how it impacts even physical health. Therefore, human rights is the language not just adopted by the civil society organizations, but globally the discourse is changing because we are moving and we are at a critical transition as a country. We are at a very important cusp between resorting to traditional methods of treatment in psychiatry and adopting the statutes, the human rights statutes, the international statutes, the sustainable goals, etc., etc.
Got it. Got it. Absolutely. Great. Thanks for that. Abhijit, if I can bring you in here, we talk about capacity building mostly in the context of service delivery. How do we, taking off on Ratna's and the earlier discussion, expand on this to the individuals themselves and shift from just bolstering service delivery to empowering persons with mental illness with the competency to take care of themselves and demand their own rights?
Sure. I think that's a growing movement. I mean, all this while the focus has been on, let's say, mental health professionals, for the lack of a better word, delivering care for people with mental health problems, and then kind of taking on the roles, responsibilities, and the onus on themselves to help those with mental health problems. But I think gradually there is a shift now moving towards partnership models where you are working with people who are having mental health problems or survivors or peers. There are various different words to kind of describe them, but working collaboratively to empower people with mental health problems to help themselves. Not just when they are unwell, but also in terms of preventing mental health problems, in terms of advocating for themselves, in terms of advocating their rights. And there are quite a few organizations which work around empowering people to do all of these different kinds of work. So I think it's a much needed shift, and obviously we have a long way to go in India or even in the West, where people are now exploring these models. There's a long way to go, but I think it's a good start, and then eventually that kind of equal partnership, in my opinion, should kind of turn the other way around, where people who have mental health problems or survivors or their family members should actually be dictating the agenda, and not the so-called powers that be who decide what should happen.
You know, White Swan has been providing content in 6 languages now. What are some of the trends you're seeing, Manoj, in the way your audiences are consuming content?
So just trying to pull back some data. So, sure. It's been now 7 years, Brian, since we started our knowledge dissemination exercise, particularly through Portal. And we also have significant work on the ground also in terms of training and sessions and engaging people. So Portal certainly gives us a very good indication of what is the consumption on mental health information. So to begin with, 40% of our traffic comes to our non-English channels, non-English language content, which itself is a good thing. We don't do any promotion. They seek us out. And there's so much knowledge required, particularly in smaller towns. Of the 10 top cities from where we get our traffic, I think 6 of them are non-metros. And clearly, particularly those geographies which are underserved in terms of the access to service providers, the first thing people and families will say is that, what can I do? Because I don't have the luxury to say that, let me go to a psychologist or psychiatrist in the city, or in the town. So that's why they are beginning to seek more and more knowledge in their local languages. Secondly, it's interesting, the trend that you've seen. Now, it is not surprising with the fact that 70% of the content is consumed on the cell phone. However, this is actually a drop. It used to be a peak of 85 to almost 90% of the content consumption used to happen on cell phone. But in the last 6 months, in the COVID era, this has dropped to 70%, which means that people are now actively looking to read and consume knowledge on mental health at their homes, at leisure, on their laptops and desktops. So you can see the increase in the need for knowledge and therefore also possibly services. In terms of the topics, anxiety and depression certainly lead the whole query across the board. But in Hindi, the top landing pages have been related to well-being and self-awareness in such topics. So there is also a very interesting preventive aspect where people have begun to look at from a mental health perspective. The session duration is a very interesting data also. For both Hindi and Bangla, the session duration is the time people spend every time they come to a whiteswanfoundation.org. It is 3 times that of English.
Oh.
So you can understand that for local languages, they really, really want to stay there, consume, get their content and knowledge, and then they know what to do with it, and then they go out.
Raghu, the Minds Foundation has obviously created substantial impact in spreading awareness. You're also expanding storytelling formats in collaboration with creators, artists, and producers. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those initiatives and the role of storytelling in driving mental health education forward?
Sure, I'd love to. It's a bit challenging to speak about it when there's a communications veteran on the panel too, like Manoj. But, I think that for me personally, I've always been attracted to what human experience is, right? And when I was working in Bihar, actually, which is when I started, what really sparked my interest to start Minds was my exposure there to the stories of individuals and, what human suffering really is. And so I've always had that interest in storytelling. And now I get to be a psychiatrist and get paid to listen to stories. And I sometimes get invited to join the story and to help along that journey for someone. And so it's very special to me. And over the years, Minds is now about 10 years and 2 months old. And so it's been around for about a third of my lifetime. And there's a role for pharmaceutical agents, there's a role for therapy. But the 2 things that I really learned from the communities is that the importance of Sangha, right, in healing, and it's building that community that has empathy and compassion. And the second is storytelling. And, not only is sharing your story very cathartic for you as an individual and healing, but it helps someone connect with you when they feel so alone in that darkness that they have nothing with them, or they feel that their shadow has even left them. And so when you're in that position and you hear a story from someone who has some sort of hobby, some type of maybe socioeconomic or cultural thing in common with you, who's from your community, that's very powerful. And so I was able to witness that because the programming we've always done in the villages, in the schools, we had lived experience. Individuals participate in the workshops, and you see that connection happen. And so that's really what we're trying to leverage now is how can we create a platform that not only has powerful voices of role models, right? Like Deepika, who shares her story and has helped so many people, but also have the voices of those from different communities and backgrounds. And so, with no film experience, I shot a film in 2018 in November, and we won actually surprisingly a number of film festivals for a short film. And what I wanted to highlight was not the suffering that mental health causes, but the opposite of that, how you can live with it and have a very fruitful life. And we highlight, stories of about 3 individuals in this film called Rise Up within 5 to 6 minutes. And that to me was what was powerful. And that actually skyrocketed the amount of traffic that we got for seeking resources and so forth.
Ratna, any thoughts to share? How has Anjali addressed the gap in mental health since you started 20 years ago? And what would you consider some of your most significant achievements during this time, including using inventive approaches like this one?
20 years back, the trend was to build your own kingdoms. And when I say kingdoms, I mean that you raise money, you start your own outfit, mostly rehabilitation centers, then it changed to psychosocial disability, psychosocial rehabilitation centers. And then you demonstrate that how effectively and how beautifully you can run those kingdoms.
Right.
But those kingdoms then remain your kingdom.
Yep.
You can't allow other people to walk into your kingdom, right?
Right.
And if they come and walk into your kingdom and say this is perhaps not the way, then you get very agitated. Then you bring out all your weapon and tools because you want to be the best. So I think at that time we conscious, I say I because at that point it was only I didn't want to build an empire. I didn't want to build a kingdom. So I thought I will walk into the existing kingdom and see what happens there. So I think I collaborated with the government. I entered the government system, and I sort of tried to bring in reforms from an extremely punitive custodial mindset to gradually a more person-centric, client-centered, inmate-centered, a little more compassionate, humane system. The process is still work in progress. It is very, very difficult to move a stakeholder like the government, but we are in the process. So I think that was a change of language 20 years back where you could collaborate with a state system. I think the second achievement is perhaps how organically our community mental health program grew. Because once you get familiarized with the custodial institutions and you see the kind of human rights violation, then you think that organically you should create an ecosystem in the community which will then prevent incarceration and forceful admission. So that's how I think we trained resource poor women as cadres, as barefoot mental health professionals, right, to go out into the community and look at mental health condition. And we also formulated a different language, a language not of illness, but of distress. So this formulation was very important. And the third thing, I think we have demonstrated that people with mental health condition and severe mental health condition have infinite possibilities. And we run a livelihood program, which is a pioneering program in the country. And that is in collaboration with the state, where recovered people from the government mental institution run a huge automated commercial laundry to wash linen and clothes from the hospital. And they are paid under the West Bengal Wages Act. And we also earn money because government has given us orders and we are one of their vendors. So it's in the PPP model. And we are hoping, we are walking towards sustainability, and I hope that one day perhaps it will become a profit-making venture. But through this process of livelihood and economic empowerment, social role valorization has happened, and a lot of empowerment and economic empowerment has happened.
Sangat, I want to talk about Sangat itself. You focused on innovation as opposed to service delivery. Could you tell me a little bit about that thinking and that approach and the impact that you've achieved over the last nearly 25 years that Sangat has been doing this?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. And I just, before I do that, I just want to underline one fact. I mean, although we kind of tried to do something different, that is, Sangat tried to do something different over the past 25 years. And the thing to remember is that what I want to underline, and what we need to remember is that all of us are trying to achieve the same thing in different ways. And by the same thing, I mean access to good quality evidence-based and rights-based care for people with mental health problem. If you look at the spectrum of what people are trying to do, at one end, we have those organizations and people who are doing this purely through service delivery, like Ratna and then Anjali. Then at the other end of the spectrum is an organizations like Sangat, which is purely focusing on research, mental health research, and seeing how we can help that to influence mental health care delivery. And there are organizations which are somewhere in the middle, like say, for example, the Banyan, which is doing a little bit of both. I mean, they're doing service delivery also and research embedded within some of. So we consciously at Sangat took this decision to go down the route of evidence generation. And the reason behind this is our belief is that the only way in which you can scale up the kind of services or care that we are talking about is through the public sector. In a country as big as India, and several other countries which are as big as India and as complex as India, it's just not going to be possible for the civil society to deliver these kind of interventions and services at scale. We have very good organizations like Anjali and Banyan doing a lot of work within this space, but the logistical limitations mean that it's limited to certain geographies. We want to kind of expand this geography and ensure and try our best to make these interventions available at scale. So the routes that we have taken is different. The scale at which we want to make change is different. But the eventual goal that we are looking for remains the same. And what we have tried to do in Sangat is basically develop interventions using very rigorous scientific methods and test them, basically with the idea of getting them peer reviewed, ensuring that this is high quality research which can then influence policy. Because at the end of the day, what influences policymakers to a certain extent is whether your intervention or whatever you're doing works or not. And if it works, does it give them the biggest bang for the buck, so to say? Does it result in change? And can it result in change not just to the individuals, but to the health systems and to society without them having to spend huge amounts of money? Right? So are you getting large change with relatively small amounts of investment in terms of money? And that's what a lot of our research is trying to do, basically demonstrate that what we do results in change and it's cost effective for the policymakers.
What are the ways in which the community can contribute to your foundation's work? If you can elaborate a little bit.
Sure, Brian.
Then we'll go around.
Brian, from the day one, when we saw that need for us to give that power to people to decide on what they should do about mental health in their hands by giving them knowledge, we decided we will never be in the service space, because there are really very good, very able people in that and have been doing work for many years. We want to complement them. And when we went to psychiatrists and psychologists and many other healthcare professionals, they said that if people who come to my cabin have the right knowledge, it cuts down the cycle time of treatment, of recovery, of everything else. So can you make sure that that knowledge is given us? So we clearly see ourselves as a potential partner to everybody who is in mental health care. Everybody who has a vision around mental well-being of people who they influence outside of mental health also. So we would love to partner, because we know what communication is about on mental health care. We know how to design communication, how to bring in mindset shift, particularly in understanding influencers who are beyond those with mental health issues and their caregivers. We have this session for bystanders, and the work we do is to constantly demonstrate to them that you are the most powerful stakeholder in mental health care, because you have a view and that view is known to the other person. Now that I've told you how powerful you are, can you change your use of power actually? And Ratnavali was using the word power, and this is so important, understanding power in mental health care space. So we see ourselves as potential partner across all those who are in mental health care and outside of it also.
Sure. What about the Minds Foundation, Raghu? How do people engage with you?
That's a great question. And so, our service delivery program is very focused in schools and community level.
Mhm.
And so with that, they do engage directly. They reach out. We have a hotline that they can reach out to, but it is a very door-to-door community level program where our staff are constantly out there and we are training within the community. At a larger scale, other ways that they can engage is that we have recently launched virtual therapy and counseling center as well, so they can engage for free care through that. But again, I do want to emphasize, similar to Manoj actually, is that the gap that we are trying to really close is this mental health literacy area. And so it's about us creating resources for folks to understand, and so they can follow us on basically any social media outlet or our website. And we're trying to create accessible tools that are also visual content for them to really understand what's going on. And that's actually why there is a natural collaboration with, White Swan Foundation as well. Now, that's not accessible to many groups. And so specifically with the pandemic, we really had to think about how do we continue to deliver these tools, right? When you can't go into these communities necessarily.
Right.
And so we started to leverage things like simply audio files, short videos on WhatsApp, anything we could do to get it out there. We used mail to actually mail information to a lot of our community members. And so when you think about even education and delivery of that, you really need to think about your audience.
Ratna, what does the future look like for Anjali? Where are you headed, and how can people engage with you?
I'm a chronic optimist, and I know that future is looking bright. And with the kind of cohort of people working in the field, people like Raghu, the younger lot, I think we have lots and lots of hope. But I think people can engage in infinite ways, Brian. People can invest their thoughts, their intellect. People can contribute time. People can contribute ideas, be a volunteer, come and visit our program, talk to the residents, buy the products that they make. We have some exquisite products made by them, from ceramic to block print to artwork. And I think apart from this, it's very, very important to popularize, maybe that's a bad word. I think it's important to talk about mental health. Swan Foundation is doing in one way, Raghu is doing in another way, but I think mental health conversations should happen in our drawing rooms and not necessarily pop conversations, but without shame. And absolutely, it doesn't matter whether you have a condition or not, but just to be able to open up and talk.
Dr. Abhijit, how can people speak with you, and what opportunities do you have to expand the Sangat footprint, but more importantly, dovetail into the overall efforts that are going on that so many others are also contributing to?
Yeah, so Brian, as I said earlier, our expertise lies in mental health research. So basically, we have a certain kind of technical expertise, and we don't believe in replicating things that everyone else is doing. We kind of tend to provide technical support to individuals, organizations, state, regional, national governments in trying to scale up these interventions. So what does this technical expertise translate into? Our expertise for all of these different stakeholders translates basically into trainings, trainings to do research, trainings to deliver interventions, putting in systems in place for trainings, evaluations, quality control, etc. for their programs, monitoring and evaluation of their programs, and then helping them to kind of develop systems which will allow them to provide high quality care, which is monitored and evaluated. And then in such, they develop their own evidence base for the work that they are doing. So the way organizations can engage with us is basically around kind of coming to us with any questions that they might have, or any issues they might have around implementing their programs, and then we can provide the kind of technical expertise to make that happen.
Thank you for making the space and time for this conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground. I think it was great to get your thoughts on how you see the whole environment within the mental health context. You've talked about your work, you've talked about collaborations, and some of those inventive approaches that all of you are using. So thank you all, and look forward to being in touch and hopefully working together more closely, either through a coalition, a collaboration, an association, or an alliance. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you.